Good afternoon, everybody. This is Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service with Alaska's statewide weather. We have a couple options for you to further research your weather forecast, a 1-800 number and weather.gov/Alaska. You can also remove Alaska and put in Juneau, Anchorage, or Fairbanks to help you further refine your search. And if you have any questions, please email us at the email listed there. For the hazards map, we have a watch still out for the lower Kuskokwim. We did remove the warning out for the Pine Mute area, but that watch goes out until Wednesday afternoon. We do have an advisory for frost and freezing conditions there in the lower valleys of the northern panhandle, and that is good for tomorrow morning. And otherwise, there was a special weather statement out for the ice moving on the Yukon. The ice has not moved out at Eagle yet. We're still looking for confirmation there, but it is moving as far as we've heard. Speaking of ice, here's the breakup map. You can see that some open conditions remain on the upper Yukon down to Eagle, some openings down below Eagle and in and around Fort Yukon. Otherwise, pretty stationary ice from Fort Yukon down to just about Tanana. There's some open areas down there, but otherwise most of the activity remains on the Tanana River system with mostly open conditions there. And the other system, the Kuskokwim River, we still have some open ice between, Sleep Mute and McGrath. Otherwise, as you head downstream from Sleep Mute down to pretty much Aniak, we have some open or mostly open conditions, and again that flood watch is out for the lower Kuskokwim. Looking at the satellite image today, you can see that we have an occluded front moving through the western Aleutians, providing some rain in Shemya and Adak area, otherwise snow north of that area in the Bering Sea. We also had a relatively strong system just south of the Panhandle there moving northward, but no precipitation there currently across the Panhandle. There might have been a few showers across the inside area of the Panhandle, but otherwise not a whole lot going on this afternoon. Maybe a few showers, rain showers across the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island. But otherwise, a pretty nice day. Once again, I did see some snow showers across Kaktovik area and into portions of the eastern Arctic coast there. Otherwise, a few scattered clouds across the eastern interior and western portions of the mainland. And what does this look like at the surface? Again, there's that occluded front moving through the western Aleutians, rain showers associated with that, snow showers a little bit farther north and towards Russia. Otherwise, again, few scattered showers across the Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay area, but otherwise pretty nice conditions across much of the mainland. Maybe a few isolated showers across the Kobuk and Nortak River systems, but otherwise around that 10-24 millibar high in Canada. A few rain showers in Yukon Territory and into the Panhandle. Otherwise, there's those two low pressure systems in the Gulf with an occluded front and triple point with that system. And for tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at, again, that occluded front becoming somewhat stationary, a 988 millibar low there just off of Russia, the Kamchatka Peninsula. Otherwise, scattered showers across the central and eastern Aleutians and those low pressure systems in the Gulf Coast, in the Gulf region, a 1,000 millibar low pressure system, a trough moving northward through the Panama may cause a few rain showers in that area. Otherwise, mixed precipitation across the Yukon Territory and some fog across the north slope there. For Wednesday's weather, that occluded front in the Bering picks up a little bit of steam, 992 millibar low now. Rain showers moving into the Bering Sea and across the central Aleutians. Otherwise, we might see a few thunder showers for Wednesday's weather across the eastern interior and into portions of the interior. Otherwise, pretty nice conditions, especially across south central. Maybe a few rain showers in Kodiak and Alaska Peninsula, and a few showers associated with that weak trough around a 10-10 millibar low. And the next system moving into the Gulf, we can see a warm front depicted there. For Thursday's weather, that included front weakens to a trough in the Bering. Another system approaches the western Aleutians, and a 986 millibar low moves into the central Gulf with rain showers out ahead of that system across Kodiak Island, eastern Kenai Peninsula, and portions of the Alaska Peninsula, and some thunder showers across the interior around a 1028 millibar high, centered just north of the Panhandle. Low temperatures for Wednesday morning, we'll be looking at single digits and teens across the North Slope. Point Hope 13, Kotzebue 20, Ambler 25, Fort Yukon 32, Eagle 27, North Wade 36, Fairbanks 34, 30s across much of the midsection, and even into Anchorage with 38 degrees, otherwise Homer 36, Kodiak 43, King Salmon 36, 30s across much of the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians, and 40s and maybe even a 38 there in Juneau, 40 in Haines, 36 in Yakutat, 34 in Valdez. For high temperatures Wednesday afternoon, temperatures across the Arctic coast, North Slope, are going to be reaching into the teens, maybe at 20 at Kaktovik, 27 at Point Hope, 38 at Atigan Pass, 38 at Kotzebue, 54 now in Fort Yukon, 58 at Eagle, 60 showing up there at Fairbanks, otherwise 50s across midsection, 54 in Bethel, 56 in Antioch, 56 in McGrath, and 59 in Talkeetna, 56 here in Anchorage, and 50s across the southern mainland, 47 there in Kodiak, 47 in Cordova and Kodiak, and then 40s and maybe an upper 30 as you move out towards the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, 50s across much of the Panhandle, Yakutat with a 52. Those Thursday morning look to drop down to the teens and single digits across the North Slope, Arctic coast, 16 there in Point Hope, Atigan 22, 34 at Fort Yukon, 29 in Eagle, and Nome 27, 30s across the midsection, and Bethel 36 now, 40 in Anchorage, Talkeetna 34, and then 41 in Cordova, 38 in Homer, 38 in King Salmon, 41 in Kodiak, 30s and maybe even a 40 there across the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, 40s across much of the Panhandle, 40 there in Yakutat, 41 in Haines. High temperatures for Thursday afternoon, we're going to be looking at teens and 20 at Kaktovik, 16 in Guyavik, and Point Hope 29, 56 in Fort Yukon, 38 in Atigan Pass, and 59 in Eagle, 43 in Ambler, Kotzebue 34, 40 in Nome, and then 59 in Northway, 63 now in Fairbanks. Looks like it's going to be the high temperature in the state from these temperature readings, and then 60s across the Kuskokwim Basin with 61 in McGrath, 61 in Antioch, 58 in Bethel, 43 and mid 50 there in the lower Yukon, Galena 56, Dillingham 58, 61 in King Salmon, and then 58 in Anchorage, 40s across the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians with 49 in Kodiak, Cordova 47, 50s across the Panhandle, 50 in Ketchikan, 56 in Haines, and 52 in Yakutat.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Taking a look at the flying weather for Wednesday morning, we can see some IFR conditions associated with a high pressure system over the Beaufort Sea, and also stratus fog and IFR conditions across much of the Bering Sea, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and into the rest of the Bering Sea. Also, there's an occluded front out there in the Aleutians, otherwise marginal VFR conditions for portions of the Gulf. And for Wednesday afternoon, continued IFR conditions along the Arctic coast and IFR conditions in the Bering Sea, associated again with that occluded front that's moving eastward through the Bering, and very limited marginal VFR conditions through the Panhandle and into Kodiak Island. For Thursday morning, continued IFR conditions along the coastal areas of the North Slope and down through Seward Peninsula and into the eastern Bering Sea. Otherwise, IFR conditions along the coastal mountains of the southeast and marginal conditions along the northeast Gulf Coast and down into Kodiak Island. For Thursday afternoon, IFR conditions, they're stretching just off the Arctic coast there near Barrow. Otherwise, IFR conditions in the eastern Bering Sea, marginal conditions throughout the rest of the region. Otherwise, clearing conditions across the central and western Aleutians, and IFR conditions through portions of the North Gulf, including Kodiak Island. Otherwise, very nice conditions in southeast and rest of the mainland. Pass conditions, all the passes are going to be VFR conditions for Wednesday. Anaktuvik VFR, Adigan VFR, Lake Clark and Merrill VFR, Rainy Pass VFR, Windy VFR, Isabel VFR, Mentasta VFR, Tanita VFR, Portage, even Portage's VFR, Chilkoot and White are also VFR conditions. For the freezing level, we're going to be looking at a complicated map this morning. Surface comes across the Bering Sea and into the mainland, and taking a scattered track through much of the mainland and down through the Panhandle. Otherwise, the freezing levels come across over the top with 2,000 foot freezing levels and even 4,000 foot freezing levels across much of the mainland and down into southeast and into British Columbia and Yukon Territory, 6,000 feet in that, to 8,000 feet in that region. Otherwise, 10,000 foot freezing level shows up there in the western Aleutians. For icing conditions on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at above 7,000 feet across portions of the Panhandle and into the southwest and Bristol Bay area and Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream for Wednesday looks to be a 145 knots coming around low pressure system there in the Gulf region. Otherwise 35 knots and more of a winds from a southeasterly direction across the southeast. Those southeasterly winds come across the Gulf, and 40 knots winds comes into the Kenai Peninsula and 50 knots there in the southwest. Otherwise, the Aleutians are going to be where all the action is, with 125 knots there in the eastern Aleutians, 85 knots in the central and western Aleutians, back up to 120 knots. Otherwise, in the western Brooks Range, 40 knots there. 9,000 foot winds around high pressure across the mainland, very light and variable across that area. And as you get into the southern mainland, you get into 25 knots there in the south central area. Southwest Alaska, looking in Bristol Bay area, looks like 30 to 40 knots there. Otherwise, 25 knots across the Alaska Peninsula and 45 knots in a more of a easterly direction there across the Panhandle, and winds coming across around that low pressure system with 60 knots there in the southern Gulf. And as you get into the western Aleutians, 55 knots in that area. 3,000 foot winds. Be looking at again around that low pressure system in the western Aleutians, 50 knots there. 40 knots central Aleutians, 35 knots in the eastern Aleutians. And lastly, for the turbulence below 3,000 foot across the southern panhandle, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and
so my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2.
That countdown you just heard? We'll get back to that in a minute. Last episode, we saw the epic launch of ICESat-2, NASA's newest state-of-the-art ice-observing satellite. But now that that's in orbit, the pressure to deliver results is on.
Between launch and, the first ground returns, took 17, 18 days or something like this. It's a time when you're quite nervous.
9 years ago, Dr. Torsten Marcus took over as the lead project scientist for ICESat-2 during a time when the mission needed a champion.
You start fighting for a mission over, for 9 years now.
So when ICESat-2 was turned on for the first time 18 days after it was launched, only then would the science team know if the whole thing had worked. And it did.
First of all, it's kind of emotional, right? Being here, ICESat-2 was developing for 9-10 years. Rocket scientist, you live the mission, right?
If it sounds like there's a lot of noise in the background, that's because Torsten is being interviewed from a plane 1,500 feet in the air. IceBridge was tasked with the job of bridging the data between the end of ICESat's mission and the beginning of ICESat-2, about a 9-year difference.
The goal is that it would run until ICESat-2 launched and then would have overlap with ICESat-2 as well, so we can get a really long, well-calibrated time series from IceBridge.
As the deputy project scientist for Operation IceBridge, Brick works closely with Torsten to make sure the two missions are syncing up.
The timing was everything during that mission, which was a real challenge because not only do we need to...
Basically what you need to take away is getting an airplane and a satellite in space to fly over the same flight path at the same time and collect matching data is really, really hard. IceBridge was tasked with two objectives: check the accuracy of ICESat-2's data over land ice and over sea ice. They were able to lock in the land ice data fairly quickly in the mission, but the sea ice data...
It was really tricky. We waited day after day. Do we fly the sea ice? It's still on our list.
7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2, 1. Mark on the overpass, 0435, 35 Zulu.
Here's what just happened. A plane 1,500 feet up and a satellite 308 miles up measured the same sea ice at the same time. This moment finally linked veteran mission Operation IceBridge's data to that of its new sister mission, ICESat-2. Two projects that, until now, were separate for nearly 10 years.
It's a very satisfying feeling because you do something that is meaningful and in the bigger picture. And yeah, it's very satisfying.
Our search for knowledge doesn't end here. Grace Follow-On and ICESat-2, the two satellite missions that launched this year, will continue to bring in incredible data for the foreseeable future. The steady drumbeat of campaigns in the field goes on, but most of all, the people who look for answers will never stop searching. And from our perspective, it's pretty clear why. What is your favorite planet in the solar system?
My favorite planet is the planet Earth.
What? Earth? Really?
The Earth, obviously.
Favorite planet in the solar system? Earth, right? We live on it. It's a really important one.
Favorite planet is Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Why?
when you look out at the other planets, they're absolutely fascinating. They've got all sorts of interesting systems going on. They've got dust storms. But then when you're on another planet, looking back at Earth, I mean, it's just incredible.
Whenever you go in different places, it looks so different, so amazing. It's just, I love the planet Earth. It's just a very special planet. This is our home.
We've seen things far beyond the solar system. But even with all that, even the amazing things we've seen, one of the most amazing is the Earth itself.
It's got to be Earth. It's got to be Earth.
It's got to be here. I like the polar regions up here, of Earth. Yeah, sorry. It's very boring.
Earth is good.
Earth is good.
We live here, it sustains our life.
I'm not going to turn my back on it.
It's got water, it's got ice, it's got vegetation. I mean, it's rich with life. And so studying Earth is a very, very rewarding career. And I think if we were on any other planet, we would be trying to get to Earth as quickly as we could.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Take a look at the sea ice conditions for April 5th. You can see even lower concentrations of ice developing around the Polinas just south of St. Lawrence Island and into Norton Sound. Lower concentrations now opening up around much of the Bering Sea ice pack there. You can also see that lessening ice conditions as you get into Kuskokwim Bay and in through the Bering Strait. As we look at Wednesday's marine forecast for southeast inside waters, winds generally from the south at 15 to 20 in the northern and central, even up to 30 with 8-foot seas of the southern sections there. In the inside waters, outside waters, winds generally from the south up to 30 knots with seas as high as 17 feet. As you get into the northern sections, winds somewhat variable with 10 to 25 knots, seas as high as 13 feet. For Thursday's Thursday's marine forecast, winds generally from the south across the inside waters 10 to 15 knots. On the outside waters, southerly winds prevail with wind speeds up anywhere between 15 and 20 knots, seas as high as 9 feet. Central Wednesday's marine forecast, winds generally from the west at 10 to 15 knots and seas as high as 9 feet there as the northern sections of the Gulf. Across the Cook Inlet, winds generally from the west at 10 to 15, seas as high as 3 feet there near the Barren Islands. And for Thursday's marine forecast, you can see that we have winds generally from the north in the Prince William Sound and northern Gulf, otherwise up to 10 knots there, seas as high as 6 feet. And then as you move into the just south of the Kenai Peninsula, winds generally from the east or southeast, 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. Across the Cook Inlet, winds generally from the north or east at 10 to 15 knots. As we move into Alaska Peninsula for Wednesday, winds generally from the west or northwest at 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 5 feet on the southern side of the peninsula. In the Norton Sound area, winds generally from the west at 10, and on the north side of the peninsula, winds generally from the northeast at 10 knots. For Thursday's marine forecast, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the south, 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. On the south side of the peninsula, winds from the south at 10 knots. North side of the peninsula and into the Bristol Bay area, winds from the south at 10 knots. On the north side of the peninsula, winds from the north at 10 knots. For the Aleutian Chain on Wednesday, winds generally from the south or southwest up to anywhere between 30 and 35 knots, seas as high as 21 feet out there between Shimmy and Kiska. Winds continue from the west across the central and eastern Aleutians, anywhere from between 20 and 25 knots, seas as high as 15 feet. For Thursday, central and eastern Aleutians, winds from the, and even across the western Aleutians, winds generally from the southwest up to 30 knots there, seas as high as 14 feet near Kiska. And on the south side of the eastern Aleutians, seas as high as 12 feet. For the west coast, winds generally from the north up to 10 knots. On the south side of the pack ice, winds generally from the southeast at 10 knots there near St. Paul and St. George, winds generally from the southeast at 15 knots. For west coast on Thursday, winds generally from the north at 15 knots, up to 20 knots there just on the south side of the pack ice near St. Lawrence, south of the St. Lawrence there, seas as high as 8 feet. For the Arctic coast, winds generally from the east at 5 to 15 knots. Across the northwest coast, winds from the east 5 to 15, and through the Bering Strait from the north at 10 knots. For Thursday, winds generally from the east at 20 to 25 knots across the Arctic coast there, just off the Arctic coast, and then through the Bering Strait and northwest coast, winds generally from the south at 10 to 15 knots. For tonight's weather, occluded front in the Bering Sea, 998 millibar low, and then scattered rain showers across the Aleutians, weak low pressure across.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.